In the spring of 1846, the Donner Party, a group of pioneers led by brothers George and Jacob Donner, set out from Springfield, Illinois, with high hopes and dreams of a prosperous new life in California. The group, consisting of several families and individuals, followed the well-trodden Oregon Trail until they reached Fort Bridger in present-day Wyoming. It was here, at this critical juncture, that they made a decision that would seal their fate and lead them down a path of unimaginable hardship. The decision to take the Hastings Cutoff, a supposed shortcut through the uncharted wilderness, was influenced by Lansford Hastings' guidebook, The Immigrant's Guide to Oregon and California. Hastings, an ambitious promoter, claimed that his route would save travelers weeks of arduous travel. The allure of a quicker journey to the Promised Land was irresistible to the weary pioneers. At Fort Bridger, the Donner Party encountered James Reed, a fellow traveler and close friend of the Donner family, who had joined the party earlier. Reed was enthusiastic about the Hastings Cutoff, having read Hastings' guidebook thoroughly. The book described a route that would bypass the treacherous Great Salt Lake Desert and the rugged terrain of the Sierra Nevada. "Look here," Reed said, pointing to a map in Hastings' guidebook. "This route is supposed to be faster and easier. We can save weeks, maybe even a month, by taking the cutoff." George Donner, the eldest of the brothers, studied the map with furrowed brows. He was a cautious man, but the idea of a quicker journey was tempting. "What do you think, Jacob?" he asked his brother. Jacob, equally cautious but weary from the journey, replied, "If it truly saves us time, it's worth considering. We have families with children, and the less time we spend on the trail, the better." The decision was not made lightly. The leaders of the party held a meeting where they debated the pros and cons of the Hastings Cutoff. Some were in favor, driven by the promise of a shorter journey, while others were skeptical of venturing into unknown territory based on the word of a man they had never met. Margaret Reed, James' wife, voiced her concerns. "We have no way of knowing if this route is truly safe. What if Hastings is wrong?" Mary Murphy, a widow traveling with her 7 children, agreed. "We've come this far by sticking to the main trail. I don't see why we should risk everything now." But the prospect of reaching California sooner, avoiding the harsh winter in the mountains, swayed many. After hours of deliberation, a vote was taken. The majority chose to take the Hastings Cutoff, trusting in Reed's conviction and Hastings' promises. On July 20, 1846, the Donner Party left Fort Bridger and set out on the Hastings Cutoff. The route initially seemed promising, with relatively easy terrain and ample water sources. Spirits were high, and the pioneers felt confident in their choice. However, as they ventured deeper into the wilderness, the landscape changed. The trail became rougher, and the terrain more challenging. Days turned into weeks, and progress was slow. The pioneers began to realize that the Hastings Cutoff was not the easy shortcut they had been led to believe. The first major obstacle they encountered was the Great Salt Lake Desert, a vast expanse of salt flats and arid terrain. Hastings had claimed that the desert was easily traversable, but the reality was far different. The desert stretched out endlessly before them, a blinding white wasteland under the scorching sun. James Reed, who had been so enthusiastic about the cutoff, tried to keep the group's spirits up. "It's just a stretch of desert," he assured them. "We can cross it in a few days." But the days dragged on, and the desert seemed to have no end. The heat was oppressive, and water became scarce. The pioneers rationed their supplies, but dehydration and exhaustion took their toll. Livestock perished, and wagons had to be abandoned. Margaret Reed, now filled with regret, whispered to her husband, "We should have stayed on the main trail. What have we done?" As the days passed, the situation grew dire. The pioneers struggled to find water, and tempers flared. Families bickered, and desperation set in. The once united group began to fracture under the pressure. George Donner, usually calm and composed, grew increasingly worried. "We need to find water soon, or we won't make it," he said, his voice tinged with fear. Jacob Donner, trying to maintain hope, replied, "We have to keep moving. We'll find water eventually." But the desert showed no mercy. Children cried from thirst, and parents felt helpless. The decision to take the Hastings Cutoff, once seen as a bold move towards a better future, now seemed like a fatal mistake. In a desperate bid for survival, James Reed and a few others decided to push ahead in search of water. They traveled day and night, driven by the need to save their families. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they stumbled upon a small spring. The water was brackish and barely drinkable, but it was a lifeline. Reed rushed back to the main group, shouting, "Water! We found water!" The pioneers, weakened and dehydrated, mustered their remaining strength to reach the spring. They drank greedily, grateful for the respite, but the ordeal had taken its toll. Several had already succumbed to the harsh conditions. As they rested by the spring, George Donner confronted Reed. "You led us into this hell, James. We trusted you." Reed, guilt-ridden and exhausted, replied, "I believed Hastings. I thought this was the best way. The Sierra Nevada looms." After crossing the desert, the Donner Party faced another daunting challenge, the Sierra Nevada mountains. The towering peaks loomed ahead, a seemingly insurmountable barrier. Winter was approaching, and the pioneers knew they had to move quickly. The terrain grew steeper and more treacherous as they ascended into the mountains. Wagons broke down, and progress was painfully slow. Snow began to fall, signaling the onset of winter. The pioneers, already weakened by their ordeal in the desert, now faced the brutal reality of crossing the Sierra Nevada. By late October, the Donner Party had reached the eastern slopes of the Sierra Nevada, but they were far behind schedule. Snowstorms battered the mountains, making the pass nearly impassable. The pioneers set up camp near Truckee Lake, now known as Donner Lake, hoping to wait out the storms and continue their journey once the weather cleared. But the snow continued to fall, trapping them in the mountains. Supplies dwindled, and starvation set in. The once hopeful pioneers now faced a fight for survival. As they huddled in their makeshift shelters, the pioneers couldn't help but reflect on their decision to take the Hastings Cutoff. The promise of a shorter journey had led them into unimaginable hardship and suffering. The guidebook that had seemed so promising now felt like a cruel joke. George Donner, weakened by illness, spoke to his brother Jacob. "We made a terrible mistake, Jacob. We should have stayed on the main trail." Jacob, equally frail, replied, "We did what we thought was best for our families. We couldn't have known."